I had 3 rules. They were not written, not declared, but they governed every step I took. I do not stay. I do not recruit. I do not bind the living. The 3rd rule was the most important, and the first to break. The call came through silence, not a message, not a plea. A pull, sharp, directional, unmistakable. Someone within my range was collapsing too fast for containment, too anchored in the living to be severed cleanly. Hu Xiaoba felt it too, her face drained of color. "Don't," she said immediately. "This isn't accidental." We arrived at a half-finished underground transit hub, concrete still raw, lights flickering irregularly. Emergency responders stood frozen at the perimeter, unable to cross an invisible threshold they did not understand. At the center was a boy, 16, alive, and not meant to be. He had been born wrong, not malformed, but misaligned. A soul partially inverted, resonance flipped at birth by a failed ritual generations earlier. He had lived, unnoticed until now, because the imbalance had been passive. Something had changed. Someone had activated it. The pressure around him spiraled inward, collapsing space in rhythmic pulses. Each surge pulled at nearby lives, workers, medics, bystanders, threatening to fold them into the same fault. This was not a ghost problem. This was a living node failure. Coalition observers were already present, distant and still. They were waiting. I understood the trap immediately. If I severed him, I violated my rule. If I didn't, the casualties would justify erasing me. Hu Xiaoba whispered urgently, "If you bind him, you'll be anchored to him, permanently." "I know," I said, "and if you don't—" "I won't get another chance to define my rules," I finished. The boy looked at me then, not pleading, relieved, as if he had been waiting for someone to finally see the truth of him. "I don't want to disappear," he said quietly, "but I don't want to hurt anyone." That was the moment. Rules exist to preserve distance. Distance preserves function. But function without mercy is just another system. I stepped forward and broke the rule. Binding a living soul is not like guiding the dead. There is resistance, fear, instinct, and consequence. I did not use ritual. I used alignment. I took the instability into myself, not absorbing, not erasing, but sharing, redirecting the collapse into my own structure, reinforcing it just enough to hold. The pain was immediate, not physical, structural. Something inside me cracked, not shattered, but opened. The second spine flared, buckling under the sudden load. My vision fragmented, reality doubling at the edges. The boy collapsed into unconsciousness, stable, alive. The pressure dissipated. Around us, the observers stirred. Too late, they felt it, the change. Hu Xiaoba rushed to my side, panic barely contained. "You tethered yourself," she said. "You violated your own framework." I adjusted. I replied, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. She shook her head. "No, you expanded it." The coalition's presence intensified, not hostile but alert, calculating. "You have altered your parameters," the layered voice said. "Your independence is compromised." "Is it?" I asked. "You now have an attachment," it replied, "a vulnerability." I stood, slowly, carefully. "Yes," I said, "and now you know where my line is." Silence followed, not approval, recognition. They withdrew without another word. The responders rushed in, unaware of what had nearly happened. The boy was taken away, breathing steadily. To them, it would be a medical mystery. To me, it was permanent. When we were alone, the cost made itself known. The world no longer blurred at the edges. It pressed. I could feel the boy's heartbeat faintly, miles away. A constant reminder, a living weight. My movements slowed, not from weakness, but from recalibration. The debt shifted, rethreading itself around this new anchor point. Hu Xiaoba knelt before me, eyes wet. "You've crossed into something no one returns from," she said. "You are no longer just a moving margin." "I know," I replied. "What are you now?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm proof," I said at last, "that rules exist to be tested, and that breaking one doesn't erase the rest." She looked unconvinced. "You'll be hunted harder now." "Yes." "And you'll be watched. Always. And when the next choice comes," she said softly, "you may not have enough left to pay." I closed my eyes. For the first time since this path began, I felt tired, not from burden, but from clarity. "That's the price," I said. "Not death, not erasure." "Continuation," Hu Xiaoba whispered. I nodded. As night settled over the city, I felt the system adjust again. New calculations, new contingencies. Somewhere, someone was already planning how to force my next rule break. They would succeed, eventually. Because once you prove you can bend, the world will keep pushing until it finds the point you break. And when that moment comes, what matters is not whether I fall, but whether what I stood for remains standing after I'm gone. Breaking the third rule did not shatter the system, it destabilized it. The effects were not immediate, but they were relentless, like fractures traveling along a frozen lake. Places I had passed through weeks ago began to stir again, disturbances resurfacing, not because I had failed, but because my presence there had changed the expectation. Anchors do not create dependence, but people do. Word spread, quietly, dangerously, of a man who intervened without permission, who saved the living when systems hesitated. I began to feel the pulls before they formed into crises, threads tightening, pressure accumulating faster than before. Hu Xiaoba confronted me on the 5th night after the Yare binding. "You're becoming a focal point," she said, "not because you want to be, but because they believe you'll come." "I won't," I replied. "You already did," she said softly. She was right. The second rule fell without ceremony. I stayed. Not everywhere, not long, but long enough. Long enough for a woman barricaded in a condemned building to believe she would survive the night. Long enough for a crew trapped underground to hold out instead of fleeing blindly into collapse. Long enough for someone to think, "He'll fix it." Each time I left, the debt tightened. Each time I stayed, the tether to the boy pulled harder. A reminder that my structure was no longer singular. I felt his fear when he dreamed, his relief when he woke. The living do not forget the ones who carry them through the worst moment. That was the most dangerous bond of all. The coalition moved quietly. No confrontation, no threats. They altered the field. Small incidents were allowed to escalate just enough to force a decision. Situations engineered so that intervention would require permanence, or refusal would cause visible loss. They were testing for collapse. The Hu clan sensed it too. Hu Xiaoba returned with news she had hoped never to deliver. "Santaye will not step in again," she said. "If this continues, the Hu clan will be required to classify you." "As what?" I asked. She did not answer, because we both knew. Something classified is something controlled. That night, the final fracture appeared. A convergence, unplanned, uncontained, and irreversible. The site was a coastal evacuation zone, temporary shelters stacked with exhausted lives, grief compressed into narrow corridors. A recent disaster had displaced thousands, and the emotional residue had fermented faster than any system could manage. I felt it hours before it peaked, a rolling collapse, not one node, many interlinked. If I intervened locally, the pressure would jump elsewhere. If I tried to stabilize the whole, I would become the core, permanent, immovable. The coalition's presence ringed the area, distant but attentive. They were not interfering, they were observing. Hu Xiaoba stood beside me, her voice barely audible over the wind. "If you stay," she said, "you will become fixed, an anchor in truth, not motion. And if I leave," she swallowed, "the collapse will cascade, hundreds will be lost." I felt the boy's fear spike, miles away, sudden and sharp. The debt hummed. For the first time since I had named my rules, I saw the truth clearly. Rules are scaffolding. They exist until the structure no longer needs them. I had reached the point where my rules were no longer holding me back. They were holding the world together. And that meant they had to go. I made my decision before the coalition spoke. I stepped forward, not to intervene, to end the pattern. I reached inward, not for power, but for the alignment that had defined me since the beginning. The second spine flared one last time, threads tightening, then loosening as I redirected everything outward, not into myself, into absence. I did not stabilize the zone. I erased my footprint from it, every trace of my anchoring withdrawn at once. The accumulated expectations collapsed inward, severed from source. The disturbances burned themselves out, violent but brief, contained by their own limits. The shelters shook, but they stood. Lives were lost, but not hundreds. The coalition reacted too late. "What have you done?" the layered voice demanded. I turned. "I made myself irrelevant," I replied. The cost arrived immediately. The tether to the boy dissolved, clean, painless. His presence faded from my awareness, replaced by silence so complete it hurt. The debt unraveled, not discharged, but spent, consumed in the act of withdrawal. Hu Xiaoba staggered, catching herself. "You're collapsing," she said. "Yes," I replied calmly, "but not catastrophically." My form felt lighter, not weaker, but thinner, as if parts of me were already stepping aside. The world's pressure eased, eyes withdrawing as calculations failed to find purchase. The coalition fell silent, no claim, no pursuit. There was nothing left to classify. Hu Xiaoba knelt, tears finally falling. "You chose erasure," she said. "No," I corrected gently. "I chose not to be replaced." As dawn broke over the shelters, I walked away, not disappearing, but diminishing. Each step carried less weight, less pull, less definition. I did not know how long I would remain. Days, years, moments. But I knew this. I would no longer be the reason rules bent. I would be the proof that they had once been broken, and that sometimes the greatest act of balance is knowing when to leave nothing behind that others can use. No announcement marked his departure, no ceremony, no prohibition lifted, no void left behind. Things simply stopped happening. The months that followed, the regions once prone to sudden collapse quieted. Not permanently, not miraculously, but naturally. Disturbances still arose, as they always had. Yet they no longer clustered around a single absence. The field redistributed. The system stabilized itself. That was how the elders knew. Not by detection, by lack. The coalitions reviewed their ledgers and found no anomaly to track. The enforcement sects recalibrated patrol routes that no longer converged. The the Hu clan closed a file without assigning it a successor. It was not recorded as a loss, it was recorded as a resolved irregularity. And yet, stories began to circulate. In the inland provinces, workers spoke of a night when a building shuttered, then held, after a man walked through without speaking to anyone. In a coastal town, evacuees remembered a moment of sudden calm. No explanation, just a sense that the worst had passed before dawn. No one remembered his face. No one agreed on his name. But the pattern was unmistakable. Where systems failed to arrive in time, something else had, and then left. Years later, practitioners spoke of him only obliquely, not as a case study, not as doctrine, but as caution. He wasn't rogue, some said. He refused the game entirely. He didn't overthrow anything, others argued. He made it unnecessary. Among the Hu clan, apprentices whispered a different version late at night. Of a man who carried debt so others wouldn't have to. Of a fox spirit who bowed, not in command, but in recognition. They called him the unplaced, not exiled, not ascended, not sealed, just unplaced. In the human world, the boy he once bound grew up ordinary. He never knew why his life had been spared. Only that some nights he dreamed of standing on a wide plain, wind passing through tall grass, a presence beside him that never spoke. He lived well. That was the point. As for the world beyond sight, it adjusted. New anchors formed cautiously. Systems tightened oversight, careful not to repeat the conditions that had produced something they could not absorb. Rules were rewritten, not to prevent defiance, but to avoid necessitating it. That was his final influence, not rebellion, prevention. On rare nights, in places where imbalance nearly tipped but did not, observers reported a sensation, brief and impossible to verify. A thinning of pressure, a momentary release. As if something had passed through, then stepped aside. No readings confirmed it, no authority claimed it, and those who felt it learned quickly not to pursue the thought too far. Because the oldest truth remained unchanged. Not everything that stabilizes the world needs to stay inside it. Some forces exist only to pass through, to remind systems of their limits, and then to vanish before becoming one themselves. They never built him a shrine. They never invoked his name. But when practitioners hesitated at the edge of a decision, when protocol conflicted with consequence, someone would eventually say quietly, "There was once someone who chose to leave so the rest of us could stay." And the room would fall silent, not in reverence, in understanding, because everyone there knew, if such a figure ever appeared again, it would not be to rule, or to save, or to be remembered. It would be because the world had once more failed badly enough to require someone who did not belong to it at all. Thank you for staying with this story. If you enjoy spiritual and mystical tales, stories of fates caught between human and non-human, subscribe and follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next.